Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, the politics of media and mass murder. The Orlando shooter was checking Facebook to see if he had gone viral within minutes of mowing down all those people. Is it time for the media to think more about whether all the coverage might be adding to the problem?
We're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
I mean, at least 3 or 4 ambulances brought in here.
Everywhere, wall-to-wall coverage, grieving families, and then a steady drip of details on the shooter.
Holmes was highly educated. A one-time medical student, he had recently been in the process of pursuing a PhD.
The search for understanding keeps filling headlines.
20-year-old Adam Lanza lived on this street, an affluent section of a sleepy town.
Each time, reporters looking for answers, getting up close and personal.
The landlord allowed media and neighbors into the home of Syed Farouk.
They were good tenants, paid their rent on time, no complaints.
But sometimes it's clear being famous was part of the shooter's motivation.
NBC News has received a multimedia manifesto from the gunman.
NBC aired portions of the Virginia Tech shooter's manifesto.
We know we are, in effect, airing the words of a murderer here tonight.
Families were furious.
He put out those tapes so that NBC would use those videos. So you're playing part of his game.
Some police departments are taking a stand too, refusing to name a mass murderer.
I will not name the shooter. I will not give him the credit.
But this week in Orlando, the shooter's face, his story, was once again a focus.
He was an angry person, violent in nature, and a bigot. He would hit things.
After a few months, he started abusing me physically.
He was a gay man, living in a life that he just could not be his authentic self.
I'm joined tonight by our panelists. Jonathan Kay is editor-in-chief of Walrus Magazine. Elamine Abdelmahmoud is a social media editor at BuzzFeed Canada. Adrian Batra is editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. And Dave Cullen is a columnist with Vanity Fair and wrote a book on the Columbine shooting. He joins us from New York City. So, Dave, I'm going to start with you. You wrote an article this week saying that everyone keeps asking, why does this keep happening? And your response is, ask me another question. Why do we keep encouraging them? Why did you say that?
Well, we make this person the star of the week, you know, kind of the biggest star in the world, actually. I mean, they're bigger than Madonna or any kind of movie star for at least a week or two. And that's a big part of what they're craving. You know, about 3 years ago, I wrote a piece for BuzzFeed trying to get some of the conversation going about not completely withholding, but what I call disappearing the killers, sort of taking them from a big star to just kind of a very small point with their names and their images and really limiting how much we do it.
What do you think of that idea, John, of diminishing the spotlight?
I think it's nice in principle, but one thing that I've learned in journalism is that people are absolutely fascinated by evil. And I think it's well-intentioned to say, well, we're not going to give somebody who's evil center stage. I think your readers or your viewers or your listeners are always going to go and get information about that person. It's the same with the 9/11 terrorists or any terrorist. You know, we're all obsessed with information about why Osama bin Laden did the horrible things he did, and yet few of us, I think, can name many of the people that Osama bin Laden killed. And this is true of all societies on Earth. People are absolutely obsessed with finding out why people do horrible things, and that will never stop.
You're nodding about that, Adrian, but do you think it's our role to sort of feed that obsession?
Well, I don't know if it's about feeding necessarily, but I think if we do it in a responsible way, we have a duty to our viewers and to our readers and to the public to ensure that they are given as much information as possible. Look, the public wants it. They crave it. And I know that they can turn around on us in the media and say, you guys are encouraging this. You guys are giving this mass murderer so much airtime. But then conversely, they want the information. So I would agree with what Jonathan has already said. I think that we have a responsibility to be practical about it. I appreciate what David is saying as well. We don't have to give this man, 20 minutes on the national news every night. Fading away is a very respectful way of doing that.
What did you think in this case, Elamine, in the Orlando? Was there too much focus on him?
I absolutely think there was too much focus on him. I think, I saw wall-to-wall coverage with just his name on it for many different stations. And I think what you guys are talking about is admirable, but at the same time, we're talking about a market need that we created, and then now we're saying we have to feed it because it's there.
I don't think we created
right?
it. If you look at, Al Capone, you go back to generations before in journalism, evil has always been something people wanted information about. This is actually an evolutionary part of...
But we've built this massive industry, and we're asking for the clicks when we do this, right? We're asking people to come to us and not get the information elsewhere. We have a vested interest in being the ones to talk about this.
But where do we draw the line? Do we stop naming, rapists, murderers? I mean, in that sense, like,
Listen,
where is it? Do we say, okay, if you have committed an act of like killing 20 people, do you say, okay, then we're not going to name them? How do you determine that?
Dave?
Well, let's just draw the line on this case with mass murderers. It's I hear what you're saying about information, and of course the public wants information, and I want information. I spent 10 years on a book on Columbine, digging into, and then wrote 400 pages on the details. But there's a difference between the information. Why do we need to say his name over and over? So on one network, his name is uttered 100 times over and over a night, and his picture is everywhere, and his image is over and over, and we use it almost as a visual wallpaper. That's laziness on our part. It's just as easy to name him perhaps one time a night or one time a broadcast, and we can call him the killer, the perpetrator, the shooter, what have you. I do it all the time. For years, I have gone on television after these for, going on 17 years now, and almost never named the person. And no one has ever, no one even noticed I was doing it for years, because it's so, who I'm talking about if I just say the shooter. So why would I have to say his name?
But this is I think this is very naive. We don't call Hitler the German Nazi leader. We don't call Osama bin Laden the former leader of Al-Qaeda. We give these people names because that's how we think of people as human beings. We think of them as horrible individuals who did evil things, and they have a name, and we say that name in the same way that we're interested in evil characters in fictional works.
But that's not on the same scale that we're talking about here, right? Like, there are real consequences, and we've seen it from different studies that have come out. Like, the University of Arizona did one 2 years ago. The FBI did one last year. There's a real copycat phenomenon. There are people who are desperate to see their name up in lights, to see their name covered like this. And when they see these stories, they gravitate towards that as a means of doing that. And so I think we have a responsibility to just reduce harm. I'm not saying don't name them. I'm saying we have to exercise caution and be judicious about it.
Adrian?
But I think that there's
Exactly. And I think, if we use silly examples like Hitler, of course he's a historical figure. He's not reading it right now. And when, I argued in my piece back in BuzzFeed to do what makes sense. I wrote a piece for the New Republic about, I can't remember, injustice collectors, and I wrote about a dozen historical figures over time. Of course, I had to name them to make them make sense, to keep for clarity in the piece, and also so if you wanted to go back and read more about them. So I did name them. Doing a retroactive piece like that, that's different than 1,000 times.
So what about this copycat phenomenon, Adrian? We have read about how this is a real thing.
Absolutely.
And that they want to be famous.
They want the notoriety. They want to see, in this case, if he was trending on Facebook and all of that sort of thing going on. I understand that. But I also think that we have an obligation and a responsibility to the victims' families to help, and the public, help understand what motivated this person, who this person was. And I appreciate what you said about the studies, but I think that naming them, maybe perhaps not repeatedly, and there can be, a thoughtfulness put towards that for us in the media, how often we name this individual, but not naming them, I think, does a disservice to the public and to the victims' families.
I don't think I would ever come down so hard on saying you should never name them, but I think there's something to be said about being nuanced about this, particularly in terms of airing the manifesto, which is something that was talked about just in the middle there of that setup pack. You should, under no circumstances, air the manifesto complete of a deranged person who spent a lot of time.
I'm going to push back against that too.
Sure,
look at Timothy McVeigh or Anders Breivik in Norway.
Yes.
Anders Breivik left behind something like a 600-page manifesto.
Yeah.
It was actually a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a deranged, evil person.
Yes.
And I think by reading that and by the media analyzing it and even publishing snippets of it, you're actually getting into the mind of someone who did a horrible thing, and you can prevent that sort of thing in the future.
It's 2016. If people are looking for this information, they will be able to find it. Absolutely no problem. But under no circumstance should we be giving an audience to it.
But it's patronizing of us to do that. Like, they're interested in it to a certain extent. I think it's patronizing for us to say, you know what, you shouldn't look at it, so we're going to give you something you don't want.
They're all not writing manifestos. They're all not, going out there and saying, I want this notoriety. I need to be recognized. I mean, in this instance, Mateen had death by cop. I mean, he wouldn't know how notorious he's become.
But he was checking his Facebook.
Sure he was, and we get that. But but if there's, moving forward, if the wife is charged, there will be these text messages that they were supposedly exchanging with one another. They're going to be a matter of public record in a court. Do we not report on that then? I mean, where do you draw that line?
Of course we report on it. I think we're paid to be judicious, right? To make calls of saying this is in the public interest and this is not. I think the perfect example of this is last year's shooting at Charleston Church. Dylan Storm Roof, who wrote, like a really long manifesto saying like black people are the problem with America. There is no good reason to publish the manifesto in its entirety. There is absolutely good reason to go through that manifesto and pull out quotes and give them in proper context. But giving that particular shooter an audience of millions of people with no filter whatsoever, I think is very dangerous.
I disagree completely. I think it's a window into a racist mind, and anybody who says racism isn't alive in the United States, you could actually point to that. I'm going to disagree with that, too. I think you actually have to air that as well.
Well, Dave, a lot of people are calling for change. How do you know what kind of change is required if you don't have the information about mental illness or about bigotry or about terrorism or about gun control? Don't you need to know the details to make the right decisions?
Oh, you definitely need to know the details. And I'm sorry if I'm messing up your name, Adrian. You keep asking, where do you draw the line? I guess we got a couple different lines here. One of us talking about not printing manifestos. I'm a little troubled by how we do that, maybe how soon, but I'm all for having them up there eventually so we can examine that, like you've said. But I think it's a very easy call to obviously allow the name out there, but when to use the great word at the beginning, diminish it. So it's a very small thing. It does not have to be repeated. It's just silly and unnecessary for it to do it over and over, and also with the image. Again, with the image, I think we do need to see pictures of this person. I think knowing what the current shooter, several times seeing him in different poses, especially the way he posed himself for Facebook, that's useful information for me. It should be out there, but I don't think running it over and over on the network news so every night, every show, it's shown constantly, I don't think that's adding value. I think that's making him more of a star in an unnecessary way. They're very simple things to do with name and image of diminishing. That's where I would draw the line.
And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But as the course of this story has been unfolding, we had obviously it happened very early in the morning, so we on the first Sunday new information was coming out, and it's a constant drip. And so how do we not show the person? How do we not name the person without giving the audience, giving the public context? And so I think that there is a duty and a responsibility to not be constantly saying it over and over again. But as the story unfolds, of course you have to talk to them.
And then John, and we got to wrap.
Isn't that the problem, right? Like if you have to fill 3 hours of airtime, you have to keep returning to the pack that you set up at the beginning of the hour, and that pack includes the images of the shooter, and you have to keep running that every single hour, and I think that becomes excessive. And I think it's more to Dave's point.
And it's that what you just described in combination with social media, which if you go to the social media account, what is social media except a bunch of vanity photos of the person in question? So if you're manning the CNN desk at 5 in the morning, a couple hours after this happened, all you're showing is photos from social media. Sure. So it's a function of technology.
I'm just not sure it's good judgment. That's all I'm saying.
Sorry, we are out of time. I think we could keep going on this, and there is a bit of change. Some journalists are starting to not name the shooters all the time. So we'll see what happens with your campaign. Dave, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.